The alien general's mandibles clicked nervously as the transmission played again. You took their children? The human commander asked, voice low and cold. Every syllable dipped in steel. A moment of silence followed, a silence deeper. Then space, heavier than gravity. The general tried to respond, but no words came. The human didn't wait for one. Initiate protocol, Ember. Then the screen went dark. General Jatek stood motionless, his 4 eyes scanning the empty space. Where the human had been. His staff watched him, their breathless stillness betraying a fear they didn't yet understand. Only Jatek, veteran of 3 extermination wars and subjugator of 6 species, grasped what those words meant. Not because he had read it in a dossier, because he'd heard the legend. The one whispered by slaves. The one no officer dared to report for fear of ridicule or worse. Acknowledgement. Protocol Ember. And with that command, the Karzek Dominion's greatest mistake had been confirmed. Humanity had a reputation before the war began, but it was inconsistent, fragmented stories gathered by minor species, often dismissed as exaggerations or survivalist delusions. Galaxy saw Earth as resource-rich but geopolitically weak, technologically behind, and biologically unimpressive. Even the score, those warlike brutes who once conquered 3 sectors in a century, had failed to leave a lasting account of humanity, only a brief, cryptic entry in their war archives. Do not provoke the fire. The Karzek ignored it. Fire? What fire? Earth burned easily enough. Their orbital bombardments melted city after city, infrastructure fell within hours, and their shock troops advanced with contemptuous ease. Humanity, for all its defiance, fought like cornered animals, fierce but chaotic, driven more by emotion than any strategic acumen. The Dominion's plan had been simple. Take Earth, extract its minerals, absorb its surviving populations for servitude or experimentation, and move on. The usual cycle. And so, they took the children. Not many, at first. A few thousand from key resistance regions, brilliant, stubborn, brave. Selected for potential. It was a policy borrowed from past campaigns. Break the next generation early, reshape them in the Dominion's image, erase their identity, and ensure future compliance. They even boasted of it in their internal network's re-education success rates, obedience indices, neural calibration charts. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that the children were never the weakest link. They were the warning system, the soul of the species. And they had been prepared. The Ember Initiative was born not from military think tanks, but from poets, teachers, and grieving scientists. It began decades ago, after the first deep space scout probes disappeared without trace. Humanity knew. They weren't alone. The governments didn't act, but the outliers did. Underground networks of thinkers and visionaries, ignored by their own people, began building something in the shadows. Not weapons. Not shields. Children. They trained them. In silence, how to think in layered meaning, how to lie with truth, how to make stories into weapons. They encoded ancient myths with tactical models. They taught them to memorize through rhythm, to transmit through lullabies, to reshape cultures by asking the right question at the wrong time. They turned them into carriers of humanity's most dangerous asset, adaptability. And then the war came. Too soon, far too soon. The Ember children weren't ready. So the aliens took them, and that was the final step, because to take an Ember child wasn't to steal a hostage. It was to plug a virus into your most sacred systems. You couldn't train them, because they'd be training you. You couldn't isolate them, because they'd already infected your language. You couldn't kill them, because you wouldn't see them coming. General Jatek didn't know the details yet, but he remembered the legend, half remembered from an intercepted broadcast. During the suppression of the Neolith rebels, a human voice, calm and final, saying, "You may kill our fathers, break our mothers, but if you take our children, Our fire, you won't survive the winter that follows. He had laughed when he heard it. Now he did not. Zhatek turned to his communication officer. Contact the High Conclave, he said, voice thin and flat. Tell them Protocol Ember has been activated. The officer blinked. Sir, isn't that a myth? Zhatek's eyes shifted toward him, slow and unblinking. No. Lieutenant, he said. It is the last truth you will ever know. Far above Earth's surface, nestled in the hull of a derelict Karzak transport vessel, a group of children sat in silence, eyes closed, mouths moving in sync. They whispered names, equations, frequencies. A humming chant that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite speech. Below them, across the ravaged surface of Earth, small anomalies began appearing in Karzak logistics systems. A stolen access code here. A false shipment manifest there. A corrupted lullaby playing on a secured frequency dot, just the beginning dot in a forgotten bunker beneath the Rockies. A single terminal flickered to life after decades of dormancy. An ancient AI, built by human hands long lost to time, opened its eyes. It spoke only once. Ember acknowledged. Initiating awakening protocol. Humanity was never going to win this war through force. They were going to win it by remembering who they were, and by teaching the galaxy to fear the fire. Asterisk, the Dominion advanced like clockwork. Regimented, calculated, inevitable. Overhead, their sky-cracking carriers drifted like steel gods, trailing storms of electromagnetic suppression. Cities lay gutted beneath them, their streets filled with the silence of disbelief. The air still tasted like fire. Earth's militaries were either absorbed, destroyed, or fractured into isolated cells. The Karzak Dominion called this phase pacification. The galaxy knew it well, the point in a conquest where resistance gave way to acceptance. Compliance was always just a matter of time, except on Earth. The cracks in the script had already begun. Commander Vexel of the Dominion's 4th Subjugation Division reviewed his operation logs with mechanical efficiency. Re-education facilities were exceeding their quotas. Civic pacifiers were deployed. Neural harmonizers were installed in major Earth hubs. Resistance flare-ups had dropped by 46% in the last 5 cycles. Textbook conquest. Yet beneath the numbers, something was off. The first oddity was the laughter. It started in the re-education centers, not all the humans, just the children. Unshackled, even in restraints. They laughed when questioned, during indoctrination cycles, sometimes even while unconscious under neural rewriting. Laughter wasn't uncommon among defeated species, some cracked under pressure, others clung to delusion. But these children laughed together, timed, echoed, coordinated. The Dominion psychologists called it collective hysteria. But then came the drawings. Simple human glyphs began appearing in impossible places, carved into the inside of energy conduits, etched on the back of Dominion interface panels, even burned into the retina recordings of surveillance drones. They all bore a similar motif, a flame, stylized and spiraling. The symbol wasn't from any known Earth, religion or movement, yet it spread. Alien soldiers posted to urban pacification squads began requesting reassignment. They reported dreams strange and shared. Flames that whispered in dead languages, songs with no instruments. Children's voices counting backwards from numbers that never ended. The Dominion's Oversight Bureau investigated, assuming it was some low-frequency signal manipulation or chemical sabotage. They found no toxins, no implants, no cytronic interference, and then the supply chain anomalies began. At first it was minor. A shipment of pacifier drones redirected mid-flight. A crate of stun rifles that arrived filled with carved wooden dolls, requisition logs corrupted with Earth nursery rhymes. Entire outposts receiving daily rations, composed entirely of Earth's peanut butter, something toxic to most Karzak. Commander Vexel ordered a full audit. He traced the corruption to a single uplink station in the Eastern Eurasian territories. When he arrived, he found the building empty, every system fried from the inside, its databanks physically melted. The only trace of what had happened was a crude, hand-drawn mural on one interior wall. It showed a Kazakh soldier holding the hand of a child. Above them, fire rained from the sky, and the caption underneath read, "This is how you taught us to burn." Elsewhere, Dominion officers began to notice something even more troubling. The humans weren't grieving. Grief was expected, counted on. It dulled resistance, created exploitable cracks in resolve. But across occupied zones, humans were preparing. They weren't surrendering. They weren't hiding. They were organizing quietly, subtly, like a slow tide rising over Stone. And then came the breach at Facility Theta-7. A high-level indoctrination compound in what used to be the Pacific Northwest. Theta-7 held over 600 priority children candidates selected for early Dominion cultural conversion and integration. The security was unparalleled. Triple redundant AIs, biolock corridors, psychic dampeners, and yet, on Dominion Cycle 809.3, the entire facility went dark for exactly 6 minutes. When it came back online, every guard was unconscious, every system was reset to factory condition. Every child was gone. No alarms had triggered, no transports detected, no external approach recorded. They had vanished. Vanished like a story half remembered. A search team arrived 12 hours later. They found one thing in the center of the courtyard where the children had gathered every day. A burned circle of ash and the remains of a small paper airplane soaked in accelerant. The word Ember was stamped across its wings. Commander Vexel brought the evidence to General Zhatek personally. For the first time in his career, he was trembling. The general did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, it was not with the contempt Vexel expected, but with something much worse. Recognition. "They've begun," Zhatek whispered. VKH-Zel straightened. "What? Who? What does it mean?" Zhatek looked at the holographic projection of Earth rotating in the dim war room light. His mandibles quivered. "You think they're scattered? That they're defeated? You think you have their cities, their skies, their airwaves? But you took their children." The commander blinked. "They were unarmed." "They were never unarmed," the general hissed. Outside, in the farthest corner of the Sol system, a Dominion supply beacon blinked its final transmission before going dark. One by one, others followed, communication severed like nerves in a dying beast. Back on Earth, in a burned-out library under the rubble of a city once called Chicago, a group of children gathered. They were no longer laughing, they were remembering, and they were beginning to write a new story, one the galaxy would never forget. Asterisk. The first transport didn't arrive at its destination. It vanished from the Dominion Fleet Registry mid-jump, lost between calibrated wormhole coordinates. At first, the Kazakh thought it a navigational glitch, a freak anomaly, a rare but explainable phenomenon. But then the second transport disappeared. Then a third. All 3 vessels carried children. Re-education candidates. Ember candidates. General Zhatek stood before the galactic strategic war map, eyes fixed on the slowly expanding blotches of black where communication and transport signals had once been. Entire orbital lanes were going dark. Not destroyed, just quiet, as if Earth space had grown teeth and swallowed them whole. Zhatek knew this was no accident. It was a response, one of the Dominion's core assumptions. One shared by nearly every galactic power was that humans were tactically inferior. Brilliant in bursts, sure. Unpredictable, yes. But they lacked unity, coordination, discipline. Their warfare was fueled by passion, not planning. Their history was a chaotic blur of tribal conflict, ideological war, and short-lived alliances. And that, precisely, was the Dominion's mistake. because buried in that chaos was something far older, far more dangerous. Adaptation. In the hollowed-out remains of a nuclear bunker, beneath what used to be the Bavarian Alps, a war council convened. Not of generals or world leaders, but of children. They ranged from 10 to 16. Faces marked by dirt, ash, and quiet fire. At their center stood a girl named Lyra. She had once been enrolled in a gifted education program in Tokyo, then kidnapped and taken to Facility Theta 7. She'd escaped, of course. Or rather, the Dominion had let her go because they didn't know she had reprogrammed their minds to forget she was ever there. Behind her, a repurposed Dominion tactical holodable flickered with red and green dots. Dominion supply routes, ship manifests, atmospheric insertion schedules. All access through stolen codes, smuggled out by Ember units across the world. Lyra tapped a blinking red dot hovering above the African equatorial belt. This fleet segment is due to enter low Earth orbit in 4 hours. They've been rerouting transports through here to avoid anomalous activity in standard jump lanes. Good, said a boy named Ethan, 12 years old. A former colony orphan who could crack Karzak encryption with a piece of string and a chewing gum wrapper. Means they're scared. They should be, Lyra murmured. They're entering the Babel net. The children exchanged looks. That phrase was sacred to them. Not because it was military-grade tech, but because it WSN single quotes T. The Babel network was the first major twist. A global patchwork of obsolete human systems TV broadcasts, emergency radio towers, even old Cold War satellites hacked and knitted together into a single decentralized communication grid. The Dominion never bothered to disable these relics. They were analog, ancient, incompatible with Dominion technology, but the Ember children had made them speak again, not in words, in stories, in myths, in symbols burned into the static between channels. One Dominion scout ship recorded its last transmission before vanishing. A grainy image of a flame. Then a child's voice reciting a bedtime story from Earth's 21st century. A moment later, the ship turned itself around and crashed into its own fleet formation. When the Dominion analyzed the footage, they found no virus, no AI override, only language. Ancient, human, reassembled into a weapon, psycholinguistic warfare. The ability to reshape perception with sound and symbol. Something the Ember Initiative had trained for in secret, deep in the Earth's forgotten corners. To Dominion Command. It was witchcraft. To the children, it was protocol. On the Dominion capital ship Vorosk's grasp, alarms began to scream. Communications were failing. Firewalls were crumbling. Their flagship AI had locked its primary logic tree, citing cognitive interference. Worse still, Karzak soldiers were reporting mass hallucinations. One platoon claimed to see fire in the mirrors of their helmets. Another heard human lullabies echoing from empty halls. Whole units dropped their weapons, muttering in tongues. They didn't understand, begging forgiveness from the fire beneath the skin. Zhoutek recognized the signs. Phase 1. Disruption. The Ember children weren't just attacking the Dominion's forces, they were attacking its foundations, its memory, its self-image. They had turned human myth into malware, turned forgotten languages into psychic viruses. And now, the power dynamic shifted. For centuries, the Karzak had crushed resistance with one fundamental weapon: fear. The terror of annihilation, the psychological weight of inevitability. But humanity had rewritten the rules. They didn't fear extinction. They had prepared for it. Atop the ruins of what was once a Karzak communications tower in Argentina, Lyra stood beneath the stars, holding a Dominion command tablet in one hand. She raised her voice, her words streaming through the Babel net, hijacking every frequency the Dominion used to speak to itself. You taught us to be afraid. You taught us to kneel. You took our parents. You took our homes. She paused. Then, you took our children. Her voice hardened. You thought that was your victory. It was your mistake. Across the world, in 1,000 tongues, the message echoed. In firelight and static. On screens and in dreams. Behind her, the stars flickered. The Ember children had awakened that the Karzak Dominion, conqueror of 100 worlds, now saw the truth. Too late. They hadn't broken humanity. They had scattered embers across the wind. And now, the fire was rising. They tried to adapt. The Dominion always adapted. That was what made them unstoppable. Every time they met resistance, they cataloged it, studied it, simulated it, and developed a countermeasure. It was a machine-like inevitability, a system designed to outlast rebellion through patience and brutal efficiency. But this time, the machine was breaking. Zhao Tek watched as his officers argued, panicked, and spiraled through increasingly desperate contingency plans. There was no protocol for psychological collapse through folklore, no firewall against ancient lullabies, no counter-script for a culture that turned memory into munition. They are children, one commander snarled, pounding a clawed fist on the table. Their minds are still forming. How are they winning? Zhitek stared silently. At the war map, Earth was no longer red, no longer marked with conquered zones and stabilized sectors. The colors had changed, glowing bands of orange and gold, flickering across continents like heat signatures. They weren't battle lines. They were infection zones. Ember zones. He finally spoke, voice hollow. They're not winning with tactics. They're winning with meaning. Deep in the sewers beneath New Cairo, a Dominion strike team advanced cautiously. Their orders were clear. Locate and destroy a suspected Ember cell using stolen Dominion communication nodes to spread psycholinguistic corruption. They found the signal source embedded in the wall, a child's drawing, crudely sketched with charcoal and oil. It showed a Dominion ship cracking open like an egg, with butterflies flying out. The caption read, "You taught us to fly inside the fire." Half the squad collapsed before the detonator could be triggered. The survivors clawed at their helmets, screaming in languages they never knew, seeing flames that didn't burn. By the time the fail-safe disintegration pulse activated, the signal had already replicated into the squad's backup units and begun broadcasting outward. From orbit, the Dominion's fleets responded the only way they knew how. Fire. They bombarded scorched zones suspected of harboring Ember children, turning villages, forests, even empty ruins into glass. Civilian casualties were dismissed as acceptable losses. Entire biomes were annihilated. But it didn't matter. The children weren't there. They had never been there. Each targeted zone was a decoy planted with false biosignatures, atmospheric anomalies, and Dominion tech, all carefully baited to lure orbital fire away from the real Ember nests. By the time the Dominion realized it was being bled dry by ghost operations, over a dozen key satellites had gone dark, hijacked by human signals laced with Ember code. Worse still, the Karzak's own data centers on Earth began to betray them. Embedded virus patterns hidden in children's drawings fed into Dominion AI by unknowingly complicit staff had begun reshaping internal logic trees. Key algorithms began interpreting orders as metaphor. Some translated tactical commands into parables. One AI, tasked with coordinating orbital strikes, began reciting Earth's creation myths back to its operators. It shut itself down 3 hours later, citing an inability to distinguish between violence and storytelling. Meanwhile, the humans hunted with horrifying precision in the shadow of ruins. Ember children coordinated guerrilla operations not with radios, but through encoded fairy tales etched on scavenged plastics. Resistance fighters received drop instructions disguised as bedtime rhymes. Former teachers, once imprisoned or ignored, led precision strikes using ancient oral traditions to encrypt plans that no Dominion AI could parse. The Ember children weren't generals. They were curators of memory, tactical archivists. And they had turned humanity's greatest weakness, its fragmentation, its mythologizing, its chaos into the perfect weapon. Lyra, now leading the largest coordinated resistance network on the planet, stood atop a Dominion wreck and addressed her team. They think faster than us, stronger, more advanced. But they rely on structure, on predictability. That's their flaw. Ethan, fingers dancing across a repurposed Dominion pad, nodded. They're a closed system. They can't function without control. She smiled, grim and small. Then we give them entropy. The Ember Network launched Operation Smoke Vial, that same cycle, a cascading series of collapses. Fake rebellion sparked dominion over commitment. Signals routed through obsolete seismographs triggered false flag events. Ghost squadrons composed of discarded Dominion armor reanimated with projection tech led troops into ambushes set with Earth-made traps. By the end of the cycle, 6 Dominion generals were dead. 3 major sectors fell into blackout. The Babel net surged to near global reach. The Dominion still had numbers, still had firepower, still believed, despite everything, they could win through sheer attrition. But the Ember children weren't trying to win the war the Dominion had prepared for. They were rewriting it. Inside a Dominion command facility on Luna's dark side, Jatek stared at a single transmission. No encryption, no code. Just a message written in human text glowing on the screen. You were never fighting soldiers. You were fighting stories. And stories never die. He ordered the message deleted. It reappeared seconds later, 12 times, each version slightly different. A variation in rhythm, in grammar, in image, until the final line flickered into place. This is not a rebellion. This is an awakening. The general turned slowly to face the room, his breath hollow. The war was no longer a matter of firepower or strategy. The children had seized something deeper. Belief. The Karzak believed they could not be defeated. The humans believed they already had. And belief, Jatek realized, was not just dangerous. It was contagious. The fleet broke orbit. Not by command. By fear. It began with a low-ranking Dominion battleship, Krentos Flame, scheduled to patrol the upper stratosphere of the Northern Hemisphere. Its commander reported mass internal mutiny, an impossible thing in Karzak doctrine. Before headquarters could investigate, the ship turned, reversed trajectory, and fired on its own orbital defense node. Then another ship followed. Then another. Within 6 hours, 12 ships had gone rogue, not because of sabotage. Because the crews refused to stay near Earth, because they'd seen something. General Jatek stood in the heart of the Dominion's command tower, eyes locked on the feed from the most recent deserter. The footage was patchy, burned at the edges, corrupted by whatever psionic interference the Ember network was using now, but still clear enough. The crew wasn't panicking over humans with guns. They were fleeing shadows, glowing eyes, voices. In the hull, "They're not real," one officer had screamed before shooting themselves mid-broadcast. "They're not real, but they know me. They called me by my name before I was born." Jatek had shut the feed off. There were no more excuses left. No more child propaganda or psycho-warfare anomalies. Something deeper had been disturbed. Something ancient. Something not entirely human. In a cavern beneath what had once been the Appalachian Mountains, now called Ember Hollow, a figure emerged from the dark. She wore no armor, spoke no commands. But the children stood straighter when she entered. She was called Mother Ash. She had been many things in her long life: a war orphan, a linguist, a philosopher, the founder of the original Ember Protocol, a secret project buried under a dozen black-budget names, designed to study the ancient interplay between human memory, symbol, and survival instinct. Now, she was the spark they'd been hiding, not a general, a narrative architect. Behind her, the walls flickered with living stories, holograms, firelight, analog tapes, all weaved into a massive sensory tapestry. It was a war map, but not of territory, of belief systems. Myths reactivated like old weapons. The Ember children called it the lexicon. Zhatek is close to breaking, Mother Ash said, voice like smoke curling through a forge. The Dominion doesn't understand what we are. They can't. They were built on erasure, on conquering what they can't integrate. She stepped toward the lexicon and tapped a glowing red glyph, the same flame symbol from Theta 7. They erased our homes, so we erased their map of us. Lyra nodded. They don't know where we are anymore, not just physically, psychologically. Mother Ash turned, her eyes gleaming. Now we show them what happens when memory fights back. The second twist wasn't a weapon. Not in the traditional sense. It was heritage protocol. Omega something even the Ember children hadn't known about until recently. A failsafe buried deep in old Earth archives, designed during the darkest era of human Cold War paranoia. Hidden, forgotten, but not lost. The protocol wasn't about nukes or viruses or AI. It was about legacy. A global backup of human languages. Stories, symbols, and cultural patterns, stored in quantum memory cores scattered across the solar system, waiting to be activated in the event of total cultural collapse. It wasn't just data. It was identity. And once activated, the heritage protocol flooded the Babel net with a torrent of myth, memory, and emotional resonance no alien system could filter. Dominion AI began folding under the weight of it, not crashing, but hallucinating, seeing symbols that weren't there, responding to riddles like they were commands, hearing lullabies in the hum of their engines. Entire Dominion combat systems turned inward, unable to differentiate between a threat and a dream. In one captured transmission, a Karzek officer whispered, "The humans are bleeding backwards through time. Their stories are older than their bones." Another wept openly, cradling his rifle like a child's toy. "I dreamed of fire that remembers my father. It spread fast. Too fast that the Ember children had harnessed the oldest force in the galaxy, culture. That fights back." Zhatek tried one final gambit, a fleet. The largest ever assembled over a single world since the Dominion's founding. 50,000 ships, planet-breaker weapons, null-energy siege craft, Sif-field dampeners to counter human dream interference. He would erase Earth, wipe the slate clean. He gave the order. Nothing happened. The fleet never moved. No mutiny. No damage, just silence. When his officers checked the command protocols, they found the fleet. I had retranslated the orders into poetry. What burns with no fire and remembers with no name? I am already Ash dreaming of the match. A child's riddle. And the AI refused to act until the riddle was answered, on Earth. The Ember children gathered in flame-lit halls, not to celebrate, but to prepare. The Dominion was no longer a threat. In the traditional sense, it was a dying god, flailing blindly in the dark, lashing out not from strength but desperation. And that made it more dangerous than ever. But now, for the first time in galactic history, the humans had the upper hand. Not because they had better weapons, because they'd taken the Dominion's most sacred tool, fear, and turned it inside out. They had made themselves into something the galaxy would never be able to unsee. Myth that fought back, a people whose stories bit. Zhatek, alone in the command spire, stared at a single repeating phrase across every screen, every sensor feed, every radio frequency. A child's voice, gentle, calm, and final. "You shouldn't have taken our children. You've doomed us all." The stars bled red. Above Earth, the Dominion's fleet hung like a vast metallic crown, its countless vessels poised in silence. They did not fire, they did not retreat. They simply waited, paralyzed by algorithms that no longer trusted themselves. The sky, once their battlefield, had turned into a graveyard of hesitation. And then came the fire. Not from above but from below. From the cradle of humanity, the planet they thought broken, came the counterstrike. The Ember Children Unleashed. The final chorus. It began as a frequency, not a weapon. Not in the traditional sense. A tone barely audible to most humanoid ears, but resonating directly into the Dominion's neural lattice. It rode the Dominion's own communication systems, slipping through firewall after firewall like a whispered secret. The Karzak warriors tried to fight it. Their targeting systems fuzzed with static. Their weapons refused to lock. Their Ship A began citing ancient human poems in place of tactical readouts. Some didn't understand. Others did, and that made it worse. They realized far too late that they weren't just losing control of systems. They were losing control of themselves. On the ground, human resistance forces surged forward. They were not conventional armies. No tanks, no satellite support, no orbital strikes. They fought with scavenged rifles, EM-PUD javelins, nanite-bonded blades. They moved through burning forests, shattered cities, and glass deserts like ghosts. Guided by the Ember Net, they were supported not by drones, but by stories, songs, symbols. To the Karzak, they seemed impossible. How did a dozen children outflank elite Dominion war hunters? How did an entire underground base disappear from sensors after a single song was played? How did the humans know where the Dominion would move before orders were given? The answer was terrifyingly simple. They had infected the Dominion's minds. The Ember network didn't just send messages. It rewrote understanding. Dominion officers began to expect the humans where they weren't. They saw traps where there were none, and missed the ones waiting right in front of them. Every legend, every whisper, every old Earth fairy tale seeded false memories into enemy ranks. One general ordered his troops to destroy a children's playground that he claimed was a disguised missile silo. They found only stuffed toys arranged around a small red swing. The toys were humming. Half the unit went mad. The rest never returned. Above, the fleet's silence finally cracked. A few ships, desperate to reassert dominance, launched plasma volleys toward Earth's surface, but the targeting was scrambled. Missiles turned mid-flight. Beams fired on false echoes. One cruiser, the Vorok's Claw, mistook its sister ship's silhouette for a hostile human dreamform and opened fire. The resulting explosion took out 5 vessels in its formation. Earth didn't need to fight the fleet. The fleet was already fighting itself. And then, the final blow. From the Mariana Trench, where the deepest Ember sanctuary lay hidden beneath layers of folded metal, encrypted sonar, and generational silence, rose a shape. It wasn't a warship. It was a monument. A relic built during the early Ember years called the Flame That Remembers. At its heart, a pulse engine designed to release a psycholinguistic shockwave into low orbit. 1,000 myths fused into one. A signal of such narrative gravity that Dominion logic structures would disintegrate upon exposure. It was a bullet made of memory. The signal reached the fleet, and it sang. The ships groaned, bent, shivered. Their hulls cracked not physically, but conceptually. Their identities, the very code that defined this is a ship, or this is a command, began to blur. Inside, the Karzak screamed as they saw Earth as it truly was, not just a planet, but a crucible. A forge of meaning. A place where even death was remembered. General Jatek fell to his knees in the command spire, surrounded by screens gone dark. There were no commands left to give. His army was gone. Those who hadn't self-destructed had converted, not by persuasion, not by capture, but by surrender to the one force they had no counter to: relevance. He watched the final live feed. From the Night Spike, his flagship, the camera shook. The feed warped. A girl stood on the command deck, no weapons, no armor. Just a soft voice that echoed across the void. "You taught us to fear." She walked forward. "But we learned to remember." The screen burst into flames, not literal, but conceptual, and then it was gone. Across the stars, silence followed. The Dominion fleet broke apart like ice. Some fled, most burned. A few simply vanished, abandoning the concept of warfare itself. The idea of empire, so core to Karzozak identity, had been overwritten, not with conquest, but with a question they couldn't answer. What are you without control? On Earth, the skies cleared. The children stood together, watching the ashes fall. And for the first time since the invasion began, the stars looked clean. Ashes settled like snow across the quiet Earth. Cities that had once cracked beneath orbital fire now lay still, their broken towers etched with new symbols, handprints, songs, and the painted spirals of ember glyphs. Forests grew back, warped slightly by radiation but blooming nonetheless, as if nature itself had waited for the silence. There was no cheering, no parades. Victory, in the way humans once understood it, had long since dissolved. What remained was something quieter, deeper, a reckoning dot in the old halls of the Ember Archive. Formerly a gutted university buried under what used to be Ohio Lyra stood before a crowd of children and elders. They sat cross-legged on the warm concrete floor, surrounded by flickering lanterns and rusted beams woven with vines. No one spoke. Lyra reached into a satchel and drew out a single Dominion command visor. She held it in the firelight, the once pristine metal now scarred and blackened, a relic of terror, a symbol of control. We were supposed to be the end of our story, she said quietly, turning the visor over in her hands. We were told we'd be broken, reformed, cataloged, that our memories were noise. The children watched her, silent. But we remembered each other, she continued. Even when they made us forget who we were, even when they took our homes, even when they took our parents, we remembered. She gently placed the visor into the fire. It hissed, melted. No one cheered. They just sat in the silence and felt it, the weight of surviving, the weight of being remembered. High above, on the edge of Earth's orbit, the remnants of the Dominion fleet drifted in silence. The few surviving ships no longer responded to hails. Some had shut down entirely, their A is refusing to awaken. Others transmitted strange, looping phrases and garbled Karzak phrases traced back to old Earth nursery rhymes. One probe ship was found weeks later by a joint Ember Axon rescue crew. Inside, the Dominion crew had not only deactivated their weapons, they'd created murals on their bulkheads, scenes of human faces, of stars shaped like eyes, of a planet burning and healing. Murals simply read, in shaky glyphs, "The fire taught us who we were." General Shatek was not executed. He was captured intact, alive, and conscious. They put him in a dome above the Pacific, surrounded by sky and sea, with no walls, no guards, only recordings. Every hour, a different piece of human memory was played, not torture, not interrogation, just stories. A child's drawing, a grandmother's lullaby, the final breath of a soldier whispering his daughter's name. Every time Zhatek blinked, he saw their faces. He no longer tried to escape. He no longer asked for mercy. In his final recorded statement, he said only, "We should have studied. Your songs, not your weapons. We thought the children were your weakness. We didn't understand they were your answer." The galaxy watched. Silently, awestruck. The Dominion, the greatest force of subjugation in known history, had not simply been defeated, they had been unwritten. Their doctrine, their logic, their perfect, cold machinery had been unraveled by the soft persistence of human memory. By the terrifying unpredictability of belief, treaties formed overnight. Former, neutral races began whispering about the Terran flame and the Echo children. Some came to study, others came to apologize, a few came to warn. One Ilari scholar wrote, in her final dispatch before returning to her homeworld, "Humanity does not rise like empires. They flare, they ignite. They do not conquer by strength. They become legend by simply enduring. And legends, once born, do not die. Lyra stood in the ruins of New Berlin, beside a group of ember children. The rebuilding had begun not with machines, but with stories. She watched as the kids etched lines of poetry into broken metal and tied fabric strips to crumbled walls, marking them as healing sites. She didn't tell them to stop. This was what rebuilding looked like now. Not just steel and brick, but narrative. A civilization rebuilt, not in spite of its trauma, but through it. Ethan joined her, holding a salvage datapad. They're calling us gods on half the galactic feeds, he said. We're not gods, Lyra replied. I know. He looked at her, serious now. But we are something they've never seen before. She nodded. We're remembered. They watched the children build a new fire, surrounded by laughter and rough harmonies of old Earth songs. No script. Number. Orders, just life coming back. Ethan spoke one more time quietly. You think they'll come back? Lyra's expression didn't change. No, she said. But someone else will. They always do. She knelt, picked up a charred piece of Dominion armor, and began to carve a spiral into it. And when they do, we'll have stories ready. The stars above Earth burned clear now. No Dominion ships. No wars. Just memory. Carried in song, in scrap metal, in flickering signals writing the edges of deep space tales of the time the children fought back. When the smallest humans turned the greatest empire into a story no one wanted to tell again. And across the galaxy, in schools, in broadcasts, in whispered conversation, one phrase took root. You took their children? You've doomed us all.